Dure, a Roman dawn. The first light of dawn creeps through the marble columns of a Roman villa, casting long shadows across polished floors that have witnessed 2,000 years of forgotten mornings. You can almost hear the distant sound of water trickling through ancient pipes, the soft shuffle of servants' sandals on stone, the gentle rustle of silk curtains stirring in the morning breeze. This is where our story begins. In a world where women's voices were rarely recorded, yet somehow, miraculously, one voice survived. Her name was Arria the Younger, and she lived in the 1st century of the Common Era, during the reign of Emperor Nero. But before you picture togas and gladiators, before you imagine the Rome of Hollywood epics, let me take you to the Rome that existed in the quiet spaces, the Rome of morning rituals and private thoughts, of philosophical conversations held in garden courtyards, of women who found ways to live with dignity in a world that offered them few choices. Picture this morning, sometime around the year 60 CE. The air still holds the coolness of night, but you can sense the warmth building, the way summer mornings promise heat before the sun has fully risen. Arria wakes not to an alarm, but to the natural rhythm of light filtering through her bedroom window. The villa is beginning to stir around her. Servants moving through distant corridors, the kitchen slaves already at work preparing the morning meal, the sound of horses being led to water in the courtyard below. She doesn't rush. This is something you would notice about Arria immediately. The way she moves through the world with deliberate calm. It's not that she lacks urgency or passion. Rather, she has learned something that many of us are still learning, that how you begin your day shapes everything that follows. Arria rises and walks to her window. From here, she can see the 7 hills of Rome spreading out before her, the city already alive with the sounds of commerce and conversation. Smoke rises from countless hearths. The Tiber River catches the early light like scattered coins. This is the center of the world, the heart of an empire that stretches from Britain to Egypt, from Spain to Syria. And yet, in this moment, in this quiet space between sleep and the demands of the day, the vastness of the empire feels distant. What occupies her thoughts instead is something more intimate, more personal. Today, like many days, she will need to navigate the complex currents of Roman society as a woman of her class and position. She will need to be diplomatic with her husband's political associates, gracious to visiting clients, careful with her words in a world where the wrong phrase spoken to the wrong person could mean exile, or worse. But first, she has this moment, this space that belongs entirely to her. Arria moves to her dressing table, where her reflection looks back from a polished bronze mirror. She's in her 30s now, old enough to have learned some hard truths about the world, young enough to still feel the weight of expectations pressing down on her shoulders. Her dark hair needs arranging, her stola needs adjusting. Soon she will need to put on the face that the world expects to see. But not yet. Instead, she reaches for a small scroll that sits beside her mirror. The papyrus is worn from handling, the words familiar from countless readings. These are the teachings of the Stoic philosophers, Epictetus, Seneca, Marcus Aurelius. In a world where women are expected to find their wisdom through their fathers and husbands, Arria has quietly cultivated her own relationship with philosophy. The Stoics teach that we cannot control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond. They teach that virtue is the only true good, that external circumstances, wealth, status, even life itself, are neither good nor bad in themselves, but simply material for the soul to work with. For a Roman woman living in a society that offers her little official power, these teachings feel like a secret source of strength. She unrolls the scroll and reads a familiar passage. You have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. The words seemed to settle something in her chest, like an anchor finding the sea floor. This is what you need to understand about Arya the Younger. She is not a victim of her circumstances, though her circumstances are undeniably constraining. She is not a rebel, though she quietly questions much of what she sees around her. She is something more subtle and perhaps more powerful. A woman who has learned to find freedom within the boundaries that others have set for her. The morning light is growing stronger now. From somewhere in the villa comes the sound of her husband's voice, speaking with one of his clients. The business of the day is beginning. Soon she will need to join the performance. The careful dance of Roman social obligations, the endless navigation of relationships and hierarchies and unspoken rules. But she has had this moment, this space between sleep and waking, between private self and public role, and in this space, she has remembered something essential, something that the Stoics would call the inner citadel, the part of herself that remains untouchable by external circumstances. As she begins to arrange her hair, Arya thinks about her mother, the first Arya, who died when she was still a young woman. Her mother had been married to Paetus, a senator who was accused of treason against Emperor Claudius. When Paetus was condemned to death, he was given the choice to take his own life rather than face public execution. But when the moment came, he hesitated, unable to bring himself to act. Arya the Elder took the dagger from her husband's hands, plunged it into her own breast, and then handed it back to him with the words, "Paetus, it does not hurt." The story became legend in Rome, an example of a wife's ultimate devotion to her husband's honor. But Arya the Younger has always wondered about that moment. Not just the courage it took, but the loneliness. What did her mother think in those final seconds? Did she choose death because she believed in her husband's cause, or because she saw no other way to maintain her dignity in an impossible situation? These are not comfortable questions. They are the kind of thoughts that arise in the quiet moments when the official stories don't quite satisfy the complexity of lived experience. The sun is fully up now, painting the walls of her room in warm gold. Arya sets down the scroll and begins the process of transformation that every woman knows, the careful arrangement of appearance and demeanor that allows her to move through the world. But something of the morning's quiet reflection remains with her, like a piece of music that continues to play just below the threshold of hearing. Today will bring its own challenges, its own small compromises, and careful negotiations. There will be conversations where she must listen more than she speaks, decisions where her opinion will be sought but not necessarily valued, moments where she will need to smile when she would rather speak her mind. But she has the Stoics with her, their quiet wisdom tucked away like a secret. She has the memory of her mother's courage, complicated though it may be, and she has something else, something that she is only beginning to recognize, the knowledge that her own story, her own way of being in the world, might be worth preserving. As she makes her final preparations for the day, Arya catches her reflection once more in the bronze mirror. The woman looking back at her is composed, elegant, ready to play her part in the great theater of Roman society. But behind her eyes, something else flickers. A question, perhaps, or a quiet determination. The morning is ending, and the day is beginning. But in the space between, something important has happened. A woman has remembered who she is, beneath all the roles she must play. And in a world that rarely bothered to record women's inner lives, that remembering feels like a small act of revolution. The sounds of the villa grow louder now, voices calling, footsteps echoing the business of living in the heart of an empire. Arya takes a deep breath, straightens her shoulders, and prepares to join the dance. But she carries with her the stillness of dawn, the wisdom of ancient philosophers, and the growing sense that her story, quiet though it may be, matters. Echoes of Philosophy. The morning ritual complete, Arya moves through her villa with the measured grace that has become second nature. But this grace, this composure that others admire, it wasn't always there. There was a time when she was just a girl, hungry for knowledge in a world that offered women precious little of it. She remembers being 12, maybe 13, hiding behind the heavy curtains of her father's study. The tutor had come to instruct her brother in rhetoric and philosophy, and she pressed herself against the wall, drinking in every word. Epictetus spoke through the teacher's voice. No one can hurt you without your permission. Even then, those words felt like water to someone dying of thirst. Her brother would emerge from these lessons complaining about the tedium, the endless memorization, the weight of expectation. And there she would be, waiting to pounce. What did you learn today? Tell me about the Stoics. What did he say about virtue? Her brother would roll his eyes, but he would tell her. Perhaps he understood, even then, that she needed it more than he did. The education of Roman girls was meant to be practical. Household management, the art of pleasing a husband, how to oversee slaves and manage domestic affairs. Useful skills, certainly, but Arya's mind craved more. She taught herself to read Greek by stealing her brother's texts, puzzling over the letters by lamplight when the household slept. Her mother, her legendary mother, had been different. Arya the Elder possessed a fierce intelligence that no amount of social convention could contain. She would find her daughter with smuggled scrolls, and instead of scolding, would sit beside her. "Tell me what you've learned," she would say, and they would discuss philosophy as if it were the most natural thing in the world for two women to contemplate the nature of virtue and freedom. "Remember," her mother would whisper during those stolen moments, "they can control our bodies, our movements, our choices, but our thoughts belong to us alone." It was a lesson that would echo through generations, a quiet rebellion passed from mother to daughter like a sacred flame. When Arya was 16, the marriage negotiations began. This was expected, of course. The careful weighing of family connections, political advantages, dowries, and bloodlines. She watched other girls her age approach these discussions with excitement or resignation, but Arya felt something else entirely, a kind of watchful curiosity. Would this unknown man be someone she could respect? Someone who might understand that behind her properly downcast eyes lived a mind that refused to be contained? Caecina Paetus was not what she expected. Their first meeting was formal, chaperoned, conducted in her father's atrium with all the ritual politeness such occasions demanded. But when their eyes met, there was something there. Recognition, perhaps. Or simply the surprise of seeing another person where convention suggested there should only be a role to be played. He was older, already established in his political career, with the bearing of a man comfortable in the world of Roman power. But when he spoke to her, actually spoke to her, not past her or around her, she heard something unexpected. Intelligence, yes, but also a kind of gentleness that seemed almost dangerous in its rarity. "I'm told you enjoy reading," he said during that first conversation, and the way he said it. There was no condescension there, no amusement at a woman's peculiar hobby, just genuine interest. "I do," she replied carefully, testing the waters, "though I confess my interests run toward philosophy more than poetry." She watched his face for the familiar flicker of surprise or disapproval. Instead, he leaned forward slightly. "Which philosophers? What draws you to their work?" And so began the most unexpected courtship in her experience, not the exchange of gifts and formal pleasantries she had witnessed in other families, but actual conversation. Paetus would visit and they would talk about Marcus Aurelius and his meditations, about the practical applications of Stoic thought, about the gap between philosophical ideals and the messy realities of human nature. He brought her books, actual books, not jewelry or perfumes or the delicate trinkets usually offered to young women. Scrolls of Seneca, treatises on ethics, copies of Greek texts she had only heard about. Each gift felt like a door opening, like permission to be fully herself in a world that usually demanded she be only partially present. Her friends thought him strange. "He talks to you as if you were a man," one of them whispered, scandalized. But Arya understood that this was exactly the point. He saw her mind as something worth engaging, her thoughts as worthy of consideration. In a society that rarely offered women such recognition, it felt revolutionary. Their wedding was elegant, traditional, everything a Roman ceremony should be. But underneath the ritual and spectacle, something deeper was taking root. A partnership built not just on duty and convenience, but on genuine intellectual companionship. They would spend their evenings reading together, discussing the day's events through the lens of philosophical principle, testing Stoic ideals against the complex realities of imperial politics. Paetus was ambitious, but his ambition was tempered by principle. He spoke of honor not as an abstract concept, but as a daily practice, of courage not as battlefield heroics, but as the quiet strength to do what was right, even when it was difficult. These were ideas that resonated deeply with Arya, who had spent her life watching women find dignity in impossible circumstances. As she moves through her villa now, decades later, Arya can still feel the echo of those early conversations. The excitement of discovering that marriage need not mean the death of intellectual life, that it was possible to find partnership in the truest sense, even within the constraints of Roman society. The young woman who hid behind curtains to steal philosophy lessons had grown into someone who could engage with ideas openly, safely, in the sanctuary of her own home. It was a kind of freedom that few women of her generation would ever know, precious and fragile and worth protecting. And perhaps that's what she's been preparing for all these years. The moment when such freedom would be tested, when the principles they discuss so calmly in their evening conversations would demand to be lived, regardless of the cost. Whispers of discontent. The wedding takes place in the spring, when the olive trees are heavy with silver leaves and the air carries the scent of jasmine through the villa's corridors. It is a small ceremony by Roman standards, intimate rather than grand. Arya wears her mother's wedding stola, the deep saffron fabric catching the morning light as she moves through the familiar rituals that have bound Roman women to their destinies for generations. But there is something different in the way Paetus looks at her during the ceremony. Not the satisfied gaze of a man claiming property, but the tender recognition of someone who has found his intellectual equal. When they join hands over the sacred flame, Arya feels the weight of possibility rather than constraint. Their married life unfolds like a scroll written in two hands, complementary, harmonious, each strengthening the other's voice. In the evenings, after the household has settled into quiet, they continue their philosophical discussions. Paetus brings her scrolls from the libraries she cannot access, treatises by Epictetus and Marcus Aurelius that feed her hungry mind. She, in turn, offers insights that surprise him with their clarity and depth. The villa becomes a place of quiet learning. Arya establishes her own small library in a room overlooking the garden, where she can read and write without interruption. She begins keeping a journal, not of daily events, but of philosophical reflections. Thoughts on virtue and duty, on the nature of freedom, on what it means to live with dignity in a world that often demands compromise. Paetus's political career flourishes during these early years of their marriage. He serves in various magistracies, earning respect for his integrity and thoughtful approach to governance. Arya watches him navigate the complexities of Roman politics with the same philosophical grounding they have cultivated together. She sees how he applies Stoic principles to his public duties, seeking justice, accepting what cannot be changed, working steadily for what can be improved. But Rome itself is changing. The Emperor Claudius, never fully secure on his throne, grows increasingly suspicious of potential rivals. Whispers circulate through the forum about treason trials, about senators who have fallen from favor for reasons that seem to shift like shadows. Arya notices how conversations at dinner parties become more guarded, how certain names are no longer mentioned in public. It is during this time of growing unease that Lucius Arruntius Camillus Scribonianus enters their lives. Scribonianus is the governor of Dalmatia, a province on the eastern shores of the Adriatic. He is a man of old republican values, someone who remembers when the Senate held real power, when Rome was governed by principles rather than the whims of emperors. When he visits Rome, he often dines at their villa, drawn by Paetus's reputation for wisdom and discretion. Arya finds herself studying Scribonianus carefully during these visits. He speaks eloquently about duty and honor, about Rome's glorious past and uncertain future. But there is something in his eyes, a restless energy, a barely contained frustration with the current state of things. She recognizes it because she has felt it herself, the tension between accepting what is and yearning for what could be. The conversations grow more pointed as the months pass. Scribonianus speaks of Claudius with barely veiled contempt, questioning the emperor's fitness to rule, his reliance on freedmen and foreign advisors. He talks about the old ways, when Rome was led by men of virtue rather than accident of birth or political maneuvering. Paetus listens carefully to these discussions, occasionally offering thoughtful responses, but never committing himself fully to Scribonianus's increasingly bold criticisms. Arya watches her husband wrestle with competing loyalties. His oath of allegiance to the emperor, his love for Rome itself, his friendship with a man whose passion for reform grows more dangerous with each visit. She begins to understand that their peaceful years of study and contemplation may be drawing to a close. The philosophical principles they have discussed so calmly in their library are about to be tested in the harsh arena of Roman politics. One evening, after Scribonianus has departed for Dalmatia following a particularly intense visit, Arya finds Paetus standing alone in their garden. The moon is full, casting silver light across the olive trees they stood beneath on their wedding day. He looks older somehow, weighted down by thoughts he cannot easily share. She approaches quietly, placing her hand on his arm. They stand together in comfortable silence, both understanding that something fundamental is shifting in their world. The safety of their private philosophical discussions feels suddenly fragile, threatened by forces larger than their personal happiness. "He wants me to join him," Paetus says finally, his voice barely above a whisper, "when the time comes." Arya doesn't need to ask what he means. She has seen the signs, felt the undercurrents of rebellion in Scribonianus's passionate speeches about Rome's future. The governor is planning something that will require men of principle to choose between personal safety and their vision of what Rome should be. "And what does your heart tell you?" she asks, though she already knows the answer. She has watched her husband struggle with this decision for weeks, has seen how his Stoic training battles with his love for her, for their life together, for the simple peace they have built in their villa among the olive trees. Paetus turns to look at her, and in his eyes she sees both love and regret. "My heart tells me that some choices, once made, cannot be undone." The night air carries the scent of jasmine, just as it did on their wedding day. But now that sweetness feels bittersweet, precious because it may not last. Arya understands that they are standing at a crossroads, that the philosophical principles they have cultivated together are about to demand everything from them. She thinks of her mother's legendary courage, of the choice that made Arya the elder's name immortal in Roman memory. Perhaps this is how such moments begin, not with dramatic declarations, but with quiet conversations in moonlit gardens, with the gradual recognition that love sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice. The shadow of rebellion. The rebellion begins not with the clash of swords, but with whispered messages carried by trusted slaves through the pre-dawn darkness. Word spreads through the network of conspirators like ripples across still water. Governor Scribonianus has declared for the Republic in Dalmatia. The die, as another ambitious Roman once said, is cast. Arria watches her husband read the coded letter, sees the way his hands tremble slightly as he sets it down. The philosophical discussions in their garden have become stark reality. Paetus is no longer simply considering rebellion, he is already part of it. His name is written in Scribonianus's private correspondence. His commitment has been assumed, recorded, made permanent in ways that emperors do not forgive. The legions, Paetus says quietly, his voice carrying a note she has never heard before. Scribonianus was certain the legions would follow him, but they're wavering. Some refuse to march against Claudius. Arria moves to stand beside him, her hand finding his shoulder. Through the window, Rome spreads below them in the early morning light, unchanged and eternal. The city has witnessed the rise and fall of so many ambitious men. It will witness this one too. And if the rebellion fails? She asks, though she already knows the answer. Treason, he says simply. Death, confiscation of property, exile for the families if they're fortunate. She thinks of Marcus Antonius, of Cremutius Cordus, of all the men who have stood against imperial power and paid the ultimate price. History is written by the victors, but it is lived by the wives who watch their husbands choose principle over safety. In the days that follow, Rome becomes a city of shadows and whispers. Friends avoid each other in the forum. Conversations stop abruptly when certain names approach. The Praetorian Guard moves through the streets with heightened vigilance, their eyes scanning faces, their hands never far from their weapons. Fear has a scent in Rome, metallic and sharp like blood on marble. Arria finds herself studying every visitor, every slave, every message that arrives at their villa. Trust has become a luxury they cannot afford. Even their most loyal servants might be turned by the promise of reward or the threat of punishment. The emperor's reach extends into every household, every relationship, every private moment. But rather than retreat into terror, Arria discovers something unexpected within herself. The Stoic teachings that once seemed like intellectual exercises now become practical tools for survival. We cannot control what others do, she reminds herself, echoing Epictetus. We can only control our response. She chooses to respond with unwavering support for her husband's choice, not because she believes the rebellion will succeed. The reports from Dalmatia grow more discouraging each day, but because she understands that some decisions transcend practical considerations. Some choices must be made not because they promise victory, but because they preserve the soul. You could still distance yourself, she tells Paetus one evening as they walk through their garden. The roses are blooming, their fragrance heavy in the warm air. It seems impossible that such beauty can exist alongside such danger. Send word to Claudius. Claim you were approached but refused. Others will do it. Paetus stops beside the fountain where they once discussed philosophy and safety. The water catches the last light of day, creating patterns that shift and dissolve. Could you respect a man who saved his life through betrayal? He asks. The question hangs between them like incense in a temple. Arria knows that her answer will shape not only their remaining time together, but the very foundation of who they are as people. She thinks of her mother, of the choice that made Arria the Elder legendary. She thinks of all the unnamed women who have stood beside men facing impossible decisions. I could love such a man, she says finally. Love him and mourn what he had lost. But respect? No. I could not respect him. And more importantly, you could never respect yourself. The words settle between them with the weight of truth. They both understand that she has just sealed their fate as surely as if she had signed Scribonianus's declaration herself. News arrives that the rebellion has collapsed entirely. Scribonianus is dead. Whether by his own hand or his soldiers' betrayal, the reports vary. The legions have declared their loyalty to Claudius. The emperor's agents are already moving through the lists of conspirators, making arrests, seizing property, beginning the methodical destruction of everyone connected to the failed revolt. Arya receives this information with a calmness that surprises even her. She has spent weeks preparing for this moment, fortifying her mind against despair. The Stoics teach that we suffer not from events themselves, but from our judgments about those events. She chooses to judge their situation clearly. They are likely to die, but they will die with their principles intact. She begins making quiet preparations, letters to be burned, valuables to be hidden for their children, messages to be sent to family members who might yet escape association with their treason. These tasks feel strangely peaceful, like the careful arrangement of household affairs before a long journey. Paetus finds her in their private study, feeding documents to a small fire. The flames consume months of correspondence, years of careful political observations, a lifetime of recorded thoughts. "Do you regret it?" he asks. Arya considers the question seriously. She thinks of the life they might have lived if he had chosen differently. The quiet years, stretching ahead, the safety of obscurity, the simple pleasures of a marriage unmarked by history. Then she thinks of the man he would have become, diminished, haunted, forever carrying the weight of his own cowardice. "I regret the necessity," she says, watching another letter curl into ash. "I regret that good men must choose between honor and life. I regret that we live in times that demand such choices. But your decision, no, I do not regret your decision." Outside, the sounds of Rome continue unchanged. Merchants calling their wares, children playing in the streets, the eternal rhythm of a city that has outlasted countless individual tragedies. Soon, very soon, imperial soldiers will come to their door. But for now, in this moment, they remain free. A test of resolve. The soldiers come at dawn, as soldiers always do. Their bronze-fitted sandals echo against the marble floors of the villa, a sound that will forever after remind Arya of the moment when philosophy must become action, when words written in scrolls must transform into choices made with flesh and blood. Paetus stands with his shoulders straight as they read the charges. Treason against the divine Emperor Claudius, conspiracy to overthrow the state. The words hang in the morning air like incense, heavy and inescapable. Arya watches her husband's face, sees the slight tightening around his eyes that she alone would recognize. Not fear, but a kind of profound sadness. The sadness of a man who has lived his principles and now must die for them. They allow her to visit him in the Mamertine prison. The guards, perhaps moved by her dignity or perhaps simply bored by routine cruelty, grant her these precious hours. She brings him no food. The gesture would be meaningless now. Instead, she carries with her the small scroll of Epictetus that has been her companion through sleepless nights. "Read to me," he asks, and his voice carries the same gentle authority it always has. Even here, in this place that reeks of fear and despair, he remains himself. This, too, is a kind of victory. She unfolds the papyrus with careful fingers. "Some things are within our power, while others are not." The familiar words take on new weight in this stone chamber. Within our power are our opinion, motivation, desire, aversion, and, in a word, whatever is of our own doing. Not within our power are our body, our property, reputation, position, and, in a word, whatever is not of our own doing. Paetus closes his eyes as she reads. She wonders what he sees behind those lids. their wedding day, perhaps, or the afternoon he first heard her recite Seneca from memory. Or maybe he sees nothing at all, simply rests in the sound of her voice speaking truths that have sustained them both. "Continue," he whispers. "The things within our power are by nature free, unhindered, and unimpeded. The things not within our power are weak, slavish, hindered, and belong to others." Her own voice surprises her with its steadiness. She had expected tears, trembling, the collapse of the composure she has cultivated for so many years. Instead, she finds herself becoming more herself, more purely the woman who chose love and philosophy over the safer paths her station might have offered. When visiting hours end, she does not plead with the guards for more time. She simply kisses her husband's forehead and promises to return tomorrow. Some dignities must be preserved, even here, especially here. The next weeks blur together in a rhythm of visits and waiting. She appeals to senators who knew Paetus as an honorable man. She writes careful letters to the wives of men who might influence the emperor's judgment. Not groveling, she will not grovel, but reasoning, appealing to justice, to mercy, to the Roman values that supposedly distinguish civilization from barbarism. Most do not respond. Those who do offer sympathy, but no action. The machinery of imperial justice, once set in motion, proves remarkably resistant to individual appeals. She begins to understand that her husband will die, not because he is guilty of any meaningful crime, but because the state requires examples. Because fear, not justice, has become the empire's primary tool of governance. In the quiet hours of evening, alone in their villa that now feels vast and echoing, she practices what the philosophers call negative visualization. She imagines the day they will come to tell her it is finished. She pictures herself receiving the news with the calm acceptance that Stoic teaching demands. She rehearses responses that honor both her grief and her principles. But theory and practice prove different territories entirely. When she allows herself to truly feel what approaches, when she stops thinking and simply experiences the reality of losing the man who saw her mind as clearly as her face, the philosophical frameworks feel suddenly fragile, helpful, yes, sustaining perhaps, but not sufficient to the magnitude of what love makes possible and loss makes necessary. She finds herself returning again and again to a passage from Marcus Aurelius. Loss is nothing else but change, and change is nature's delight. The words feel both true and inadequate, like trying to hold the ocean in a cup. Change is indeed natural, but some changes require more courage than nature typically demands of mortal hearts. One evening, as she tends the small garden they planted together, she makes a decision that surprises even her. If the state will take her husband's life, it will not take it alone. If philosophy has taught her anything, it is that some bonds transcend the arbitrary power of emperors, that love, properly understood, is not possession, but participation, not holding on to another, but joining them in whatever journey honor demands. She does not announce this decision, does not write it in letters or confide it to servants. Instead, she simply begins to prepare, with the same careful attention she has always brought to important undertakings. She arranges for the villa to pass to distant relatives. She writes letters to be delivered after, letters that explain without justifying, that honor without condemning. Most importantly, she begins the internal work of transforming intention into capability. The philosophers speak often of preferred indifference, things that are naturally desirable but not essential to virtue. Life itself, she realizes, falls into this category. Preferred, certainly, but not more valuable than integrity, than love, than the coherence between belief and action that makes a human life meaningful, rather than merely long. The city continues its ancient rhythms beyond her garden walls. Merchants bargain, children learn their letters, Women weave cloth and plan meals and worry about their families. Life persists in all its ordinary complexity, indifferent to the particular tragedy unfolding in one villa, around one couple's attempt to live with honor in dishonorable times. Soon, very soon, she will be called upon to demonstrate whether philosophy has been merely intellectual exercise or genuine preparation for the tests that define a soul. Words and deeds. That test arrives on a morning when spring light filters weakly through her villa's windows, casting pale shadows across marble floors that feel suddenly cold beneath her feet. The summons comes not through official channels, but through whispered words from a sympathetic guard. A final visit has been granted. She dresses with particular care, choosing the deep blue stola that Paetus always admired, the one that brings out the flecks of gold in her brown eyes. Her hands are steady as she arranges her hair, though something deeper trembles. Not fear, exactly, but the profound weight of approaching finality. The prison corridors echo with her footsteps, each sound a small percussion marking time's relentless passage. When she sees him through the iron bars, her heart contracts with unexpected force. This man who once debated philosophy with such passion, who found joy in her mind's quick turns. He sits hunched on rough stone, his shoulders bearing the visible weight of despair. Aria. His voice carries relief and shame in equal measure. You shouldn't have come again. She settles beside him, her silk stola a startling contrast to the cell's harsh surfaces. Where else would I be? They speak quietly of small things at first, the garden's progress, news from friends, anything but the approaching execution. But gradually, inevitably, the conversation turns to what lies ahead. And here, in this moment, she discovers something that pierces her more deeply than her own approaching loss. I don't know if I can do it with dignity, he whispers, the words barely audible. The sword feels so heavy in my imagination. What if I hesitate? What if I bring shame to everything we've believed? The great Stoic teachings speak of courage in abstract terms, virtue as the highest good, the importance of facing death with equanimity. But here, watching this man she loves confront his very human terror, Aria understands that philosophy without compassion is merely intellectual vanity. Show me the blade, she says quietly. Paetus looks at her with confusion, then slowly produces the short sword the guards have permitted him. The traditional means by which condemned Romans might preserve their honor, the metal catches what little light penetrates this dark place. Without hesitation, without the tremor she might have expected, Aria takes the weapon. The handle feels surprisingly warm in her palm, as if it holds some essential life force rather than its opposite. She meets her husband's eyes, those eyes that first saw her mind as worthy of respect, that recognized her as more than Roman society would ever acknowledge. Paetus, she says, her voice carrying absolute calm. It does not hurt. The blade finds its mark with swift certainty. Pain flares briefly, then transforms into something else entirely. A strange lightness, as if some long-carried burden has finally been set down. She sees his face change, watches understanding and terrible love flood his features. Now you know, she whispers, pressing the sword back into his trembling hands. There's nothing to fear. What happens next unfolds with the inevitability of dawn following darkness. Paetus, witnessing her courage, finds his own. The philosophical principles they've discussed through years of marriage. Honor, virtue, the soul's fundamental freedom. These abstractions suddenly crystallize into concrete action. Later, much later, when their story spreads through Rome's whispered conversations, people will focus on the dramatic gesture. They'll repeat her words as if they were scripted for theater rather than spoken from the depths of love. But those who knew her best will remember something else entirely. The way she transformed terror into possibility through simple presence. How she made the unbearable bearable, not through grand speeches, but through quiet demonstration. The profound intimacy of two souls choosing their fate together rather than having it chosen for them. In death, as in life, she refused to let philosophy remain mere words. She made it flesh, made it real, made it a bridge between human frailty and divine strength. Her final gift was not just courage. It was the knowledge that love and principle need not exist in opposition, that the highest teachings find their truest expression in the smallest acts of grace. The quiet sea. The blade falls from her fingers, and with it, the weight of a lifetime spent carrying others' expectations. In these final moments, Arya feels something she has rarely known, the profound quiet of a choice made entirely for herself, even as it serves the deepest love she has ever known. Her breath comes slower now, each one a conscious gift. The prison walls seem to dissolve around her, replaced by something vast and welcoming. She thinks of her mother's garden, the way morning light used to filter through olive leaves, creating patterns of shadow and gold on ancient stone. How simple those moments were. How perfect. Paetus takes the blade with steady hands now. His fear has transformed into something else. Gratitude, perhaps, or recognition. She has shown him that courage is not the absence of terror, but the presence of something greater. Love. Purpose. The knowledge that some choices transcend survival. Non dolet, she whispers again, though her voice grows fainter. It does not hurt, and truly, it doesn't. There is only a spreading warmth, a sense of coming home to herself after decades of careful performance. She remembers being 7 years old, watching her mother tend the household shrine, how her mother's hands moved with such certainty among the sacred objects, as if she knew secrets the rest of the world had forgotten. Now Arya understands. The secret was never about the gods. It was about knowing, absolutely, who you are when everything else falls away. The Stoic texts she studied by lamplight seem distant now, their careful arguments unnecessary. Philosophy was always meant to lead here, to this moment of perfect clarity where thought and action become one, where the self dissolves into something larger without losing its essential truth. She feels Paetus's hand find hers, warm, real, anchoring her to this final act of shared courage. They have created something together that the empire cannot touch, a love that chooses its own terms, writes its own ending. This is their rebellion, not against Claudius, but against the idea that they must accept whatever fate others design for them. The prison grows quiet around them. Even the guards seem to sense they are witnessing something sacred, a ritual older than Rome itself. Two souls choosing dignity over survival, principle over compromise. It is, she realizes, what she has been preparing for her entire life. Every morning meditation, every studied text, every moment of choosing grace over bitterness, all leading to this. Her mother's voice echoes across the years. Courage is not something you find, my daughter. It is something you become. And now, finally, Arya understands. She has become courage. She has become love. She has become the bridge between the world as it is and the world as it should be. The light in the cell seems different now, softer, more golden, like those mornings in her mother's garden, like the first dawn she and Paetus watched together as newlyweds, believing they had all the time in the world. Perhaps they did. Perhaps this moment contains all moments, every sunrise, every shared glance, every quiet triumph over fear. Her breathing slows, becomes part of something larger, the eternal rhythm that connects all things. the quiet sea that lies beneath every storm, waiting to welcome travelers home. She has spent so much of her life swimming against currents, fighting to be seen, to be heard, to matter. Now she can finally rest, knowing that love leaves marks on the world that outlast empires. In the gathering stillness, Arya finds what she has always been seeking, not escape from herself, but the deepest possible return to who she has always been. Echoes of courage, the wisdom she carried. The questions she asked in the darkness of her room, the way she chose love over safety, these ripple forward through time like stones cast into still water. Her story becomes part of the great conversation that women have been having for centuries, whispered from mother to daughter, shared in the spaces between what history chooses to remember. You can feel it now, that same quiet strength that lived in Arya's heart. It lives in yours, too. The courage to be authentic when the world asks you to perform. The grace to set boundaries when others would have you carry their burdens. The wisdom to know that your worth was never dependent on their approval. These are not new struggles. They are ancient ones, and you are part of an unbroken line of women who have faced them with dignity. The Stoic philosophers spoke of the eternal city, not Rome with its marble and ambition, but the invisible community of souls who choose virtue over convenience, truth over comfort. Arya found her citizenship there, and so can you, in the quiet moments when you choose kindness over criticism, when you speak your truth even when your voice shakes, when you love yourself as fiercely as you love others. The villa grows quiet now, morning lights softening into something timeless. The scrolls rest peacefully on their shelves. The garden breathes slowly in the eternal rhythm of seasons, and somewhere in the space between sleeping and waking, you can almost hear it. The gentle voice that has been with you all along, reminding you that you are enough. You have always been enough. You were born enough. The stories of forgotten women echo forward like lullabies, like prayers, like promises that your struggles matter. Your choices ripple outward in ways you may never see, and your courage, even the quiet, everyday kind, becomes part of the great tapestry that connects all seekers of truth, all guardians of love, all women who have ever looked at the stars and wondered about their place in the vast, beautiful mystery of being alive, being seen, being finally, completely, peacefully at home in the sanctuary of their own becoming.